So between January and December of 2023, human beings and automated bots posted about artificial intelligence on social media over 7 million times.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a massive number.
7 million. Right. And that data, by the way, comes directly from Quid's analysis for the Stanford HAI AI Index report for 2024.
Right.
So if you were a business owner or, a marketer trying to be heard in that environment, you don't just have a marketing problem anymore. You have this like massive noise pollution problem.
You really do. I mean, it is a staggering volume of information to compete with. And the reality is AI and social media haven't just collided over the past year. They've fundamentally merged into this single, highly chaotic ecosystem.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this deep dive right now, you've probably felt that chaos firsthand, right? You probably stared at a blank Claude chat box, typed in some generic prompt you bought off a Twitter thread or something.
We have all been there.
Exactly. And you got back a post so incredibly robotic and, well, hollow that you wouldn't dare put it on your company's LinkedIn page.
Right, because it just sounds like a machine wrote it.
Right. You want to cut through that massive wall of AI marketing hype. You really don't want another, listicle of prompt hacks. You want a practical, actionable system.
Which is exactly our mission for today. We are going to take a very specific, highly searched, and honestly deeply misunderstood concept, which is the Claude social media skill.
Yeah.
And we are going to completely tear it apart. Like, we're going to look at the mechanics of how it actually works, and more importantly, how it fails.
Yeah. Ultimately, our goal over the course of this deep dive is to transform this abstract buzzword into a really concrete 60-minute weekly marketing sprint.
Right. A real system.
Exactly. A system that drives predictable growth without requiring like a PhD in computer science or some massive enterprise budget. And to guide us through this, we're relying on a really fantastic foundational text written by Frank Heidenreich.
Yeah, Frank is great. He's the chief marketing officer at Whoop Social. And, his background is exactly the kind of grounded expertise you actually need when you're navigating this space.
Yeah, he's not just theorizing.
Not at all. I mean, we are talking about over 14 years of experience. He's collaborated with over 300 influencers, and he has successfully scaled organic social strategies for more than 230 companies across 14 different countries.
That's a serious track record. He brings this perspective that is just incredibly rare right now because he's looking at this technology not as an AI researcher trying to build some fascinating new toy, right?
Right.
He's looking at it as a marketer who is actually accountable for driving real revenue while maintaining strict brand safety.
Exactly. He evaluates Claude purely through the lens of business utility. Like, how do we take this incredibly powerful language model and actually turn it into a reliable engine for growth?
Okay, let's unpack this, because the very first thing Frank points out in his guide is that the market is just fundamentally confused about what a Claude social media skill actually is.
Oh, completely.
Yeah, like if you type that phrase into a search engine right now, you're going to get two entirely different concepts totally mixed together.
And conflating those two concepts is precisely where most small businesses take their first, disastrous wrong turn. It just leads to massive operational headaches.
So what are the two meanings?
Well, the first meaning you'll usually encounter refers to a pre-built skill that you literally install into your workspace.
Okay, so almost like downloading an app on your phone or like a software plugin for your browser.
Precisely, yeah. It is a highly formulaic set of instructions, pre-written system prompts, and API connectors that just force Claude to function in a very narrow, highly defined way.
Okay.
So, for example, you might go to a directory and install a skill that turns Claude strictly into a social media strategist or a repurposer or an auditor.
And the appeal there is really obvious, I think. I mean, if your priority is pure speed, enforcing some level of consistency across a team of, say, junior marketers,
right,
and just not having to write complex prompts from scratch every time, this packaged product looks like a total silver bullet.
It does. It absolutely is the path of least resistance. But then you have the second meaning of the term, which is where Frank focuses the vast majority of his strategic weight.
Right. And the second meaning isn't a tangible piece of software you download at all. The source material actually describes it as a superpower or a methodology to copy.
Yes.
It's using Claude to deeply understand your specific audience, refine your core messaging, and build an entire closed-loop growth system. But I have to push back here for a second.
Oh, please do.
Because when I hear the word superpower thrown around in a marketing context, my jargon alarm just starts blaring at maximum volume.
Fair enough.
Right. Isn't calling it a superpower just a really fancy, self-aggrandizing way of saying being good at writing prompts?
Well,
To me, this sounds like the difference between buying a high-end microwave, which is the installed tool, and actually learning to be a master chef, which is the so-called superpower.
that is actually a brilliant analogy, and it gets right to the mechanical heart of Frank's argument. Let's really explore that microwave versus master chef idea, because if you just buy the microwave, if you just install that pre-built tool and start hitting buttons, what do you actually get?
You get a lot of hot food,
Yeah.
really fast. But it's probably just a stack of frozen dinners.
Exactly.
In the context of our deep dive, you basically get a massive stack of random, disconnected, AI-generated drafts.
Yes. You get isolated outputs. There is no overarching strategy whatsoever. You are just solving the immediate panic of, I need something to post on LinkedIn today.
Right, just feeding the beast.
But when you learn the methodology, when you become the master chef, you shift your entire business model away from that daily anxiety. You step into what Frank defines as a growth loop.
Let's clearly define the mechanics of that growth loop for the listener. How does it actually function in practice?
So a growth loop is a closed ecosystem where every single action feeds the subsequent action. It's not a straight line, right? It's a circular. It starts with your strategic planning, which directly dictates the specific parameters of the content you generate and publish. Then, the performance of that published content generates hard analytics.
Right, you get the data back.
Exactly. And crucially, those analytics feed directly back into next week's strategic planning phase.
So the system is just constantly learning from itself.
Yes, it is this continuous cycle of refinement. And for a small business, establishing that loop is the absolute holy grail. It transforms social media from an unpredictable chore into a reliable, predictable engine for customer acquisition.
Okay, I follow the logic there.
Yeah.
But if we want to build that MasterChef growth loop, we can't just rely on our bare hands.
Right, definitely not.
We still need appliances in the kitchen. We still need to make sure we are buying the right tools to actually facilitate that loop, which leads us to a massive hurdle.
Oh, yeah.
How does a marketer actually look at these AI tool directories, which, let's be honest, are flooded with thousands of options right now, and select the right Claude skill for their specific business?
Right. And this brings us to a really harsh structural reality about the AI tool marketplace right now. When you go to a directory to find a Claude social media skill, you have to understand that these lists are algorithmically ranked by demand and search volume, not by impact or efficacy.
Wait, really? Meaning the most popular tool at the top of the page isn't necessarily the most effective tool.
Exactly. It might just be the one with the biggest marketing budget or the one that solves the most generic, surface-level problem for the widest number of people.
Wow, okay, so popularity does not equal utility.
Correct. And Frank cuts through all this directory noise by arguing that despite the thousands of shiny objects out there, there are functionally only 5 core skills a small business will ever need to evaluate.
Out of the entire ecosystem, just 5 categories of tools.
Just 5.
Okay, let's break them down mechanically.
Sure. First, you have the strategist or writer skills. These are really language generation heavy. They're designed to take your core business offer, your value proposition, and translate it into engaging, platform-native social media copy.
So they are essentially the blank page solvers.
Exactly. They get you past the blinking cursor. Second, you have repurposer skills. Now, these function quite differently. They require an input of an existing asset,
Like what kind of asset?
like a 3,000-word blog post or maybe an hour-long podcast transcript or a dense webinar presentation. The skills function is to ingest that massive context window and literally chop it up into bite-sized, platform-appropriate pieces.
Ah, okay. To help you get the maximum mileage out of the intellectual property you've already spent time creating.
Right, which is absolutely essential for not burning out.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Third are the auditor skills. Now, these are highly analytical, not generative at all.
Interesting. So what do they do?
Well, say you are posting consistently, but your follower count is just stagnant and your engagement is completely flat. An auditor skill looks at your historical feed. It analyzes the semantic topics you are actually covering, compares them against engagement rates, and identifies what is fundamentally broken or misaligned in your approach.
Okay, so it's diagnosing the illness, essentially.
Yes.
Fourth on the list.
Fourth are the publisher or connector skills. These are purely infrastructural. They do not write the content, and they do not analyze the strategy. They just take the finalized, human-approved content and physically push it through APIs to your LinkedIn, your X account, and your Instagram feed.
So they're basically just the digital plumbing.
Yes, the plumbing.
Okay.
And finally, the fifth category is social listening or research skills. These are external-facing analytical tools.
External facing.
Right. They're used to scan the broader market, identifying what your potential customers are complaining about in forums, what specific questions they're asking in the comment sections, and what your competitors are successfully leveraging.
Okay, so we have our 5 core categories: writers, repurposers, auditors, publishers, and listeners.
Correct.
But Frank makes a really important strategic point here. You don't just log on, download the best-in-class tool for all 5 categories, and start mashing buttons. You have to strategically match the specific skill to your unique business funnel.
And this is where his 14 years of scaling organic strategy really shine, I think. He absolutely refuses to give a one-size-fits-all answer. He categorizes the strategic match by business type.
Let's walk through those.
Let's start by looking at creators. If you are a solo creator or a thought leader, your biggest structural bottleneck is not ideas, usually. It is time and energy.
Right, you only have so many hours in the day to film and write.
Therefore, your strategic match is the repurposer skill. You need a reliable content engine that takes your one brilliant long-form idea for the week, say a deeply researched newsletter,
Yeah.
and autonomously turns it into 20 different posts across various platforms. That is how you maintain omnipresence without suffering total burnout.
That makes total sense for a solo operator online.
Yeah.
But what if you are a local brick-and-mortar business? Like, let's use a tangible example. Say, I am running a neighborhood coffee shop or maybe a local plumbing service in Cincinnati. The repurposer tool isn't really going to save me.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Because a local business operates on a completely different physical and digital funnel. They don't need viral reach in another country. I mean, 1 million views from users in Australia does absolutely nothing for a coffee shop in Ohio.
Right, you can't ship them a latte.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need foot traffic and phone calls today. So for them, the strategic focus must be on offer-first posts, showing tangible proof of their work, and leveraging local community cues.
I want to pause on that phrase for a second, community cues,
Yeah.
because I can already hear the skepticism from our listener.
Sure.
If I am a local listening to this deep dive and I see my neighborhood coffee shop suddenly posting an AI-generated infographic about the history of my street, my inauthentic radar is going to go off immediately.
Of course.
I'm going to recognize that robotic tone. So how do we keep the AI from sounding like a robot wearing a Hello Fellow Kids t-shirt?
That is a highly astute critique, and it's exactly why the local business needs the social listening and research skill, not just a generic writer skill.
Oh, interesting.
You don't use Claude to invent fake local pride. You use the research skill to ingest massive amounts of hyper-local data. Maybe transcripts of local city council meetings, the top posts from the neighborhood subreddit, or even the menus of surrounding non-competing businesses.
Ah, I see.
You use the AI to identify the genuine underlying themes of what the community actually cares about right now. Like, is there construction blocking the main road? Is there a big high school football game this Friday? You extract those genuine cues, and then you anchor your coffee shop's real-world offers to those specific, locally relevant realities.
Oh, wow.
You are using the AI for intelligence, not for artificial personality. That is how you avoid the generic global trends that do nothing to drive walk-ins.
So doing a globally trending dance on TikTok isn't going to fix a leaky pipe in Cincinnati. But analyzing the local Facebook group to realize everyone is complaining about hard water damage and then offering a hard water filter special.
Exactly.
That is how a plumber uses AI.
Precisely. Now let's contrast that with B2B, business to business. If you run a SaaS company or a specialized consulting firm, your growth loop is entirely different again. You need the strategist skill.
Because your goal isn't local foot traffic.
Right. Your goal is taking highly dense, complex, industry-specific expertise and translating it into point of view or POV posts.
You need to establish intellectual authority.
Yes. You need the strategist skill to generate case study snippets that systematically move a professional buyer from simply being aware of your brand to actually feeling compelled to initiate a high-ticket sales conversation.
Makes sense. And lastly, what about e-commerce? You are selling physical products online, shipping them out of a warehouse.
For e-commerce, the loop is all about visual product storytelling. It is about user-generated content, or UGC, angles, finding creative ways to make your customers the hero of the marketing story. And crucially, it requires a relentless cadence of testing different hooks and offers. You need a skill that can rapidly generate dozens of variations of ad copy to see which specific psychological angle drives the cheapest clicks to your shopping cart.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because as we talk about all these amazing capabilities, Frank warns about a structural trap that I think, honestly, a lot of us have fallen victim to. He calls it tool sprawl.
Yes, it is the dark side of the paradox of choice in the AI era.
Right. Because you hear about these 5 incredible categories of skills, and the immediate instinct as a marketer is, great, I'll go download the best writer, and then I'll find the best auditor, and I'll hook up the best publisher. And suddenly you have this incredibly fractured tech stack. You have 5 highly specialized but completely disconnected skills.
And what is the real-world result of that?
The result is that you have all the theoretical flexibility in the world, but your daily operational workflow is an absolute nightmare.
Total chaos.
Yeah, you end up with a Google Drive folder full of random AI drafts, a publishing tool that won't connect, an auditor that is analyzing the wrong data, and 0 actual consistency on your timeline. It's like having a massive toolbox filled with highly specialized instruments, but you can never find the one simple wrench you need to actually turn the bolt.
What's fascinating here is how aggressively Frank argues against that exact scenario. He states that having a fractured tech stack is often fatal for small businesses because it drains the one resource they really cannot replenish, which is time.
Yeah.
He proposes that a single, deeply integrated, brand-aware generation tool, one that fundamentally understands your specific tone of voice, your negative constraints, and your aesthetics, paired with just one reliable publishing tool, is vastly superior to cobbling together 5 different specialized micro tools.
So consolidation over specialization.
Exactly. And this preference for consolidated, highly directed action isn't just, an anecdotal observation from one marketer. It is deeply backed by macro-level data.
Really? Like what?
If we look at Anthropic's 2025 index report on enterprise AI, which is a massive study that looked at adoption patterns across more than 150 countries, they found a significant structural shift in how professional users are actually interacting with AI.
Okay, what was the shift?
The percentage of conversations categorized as directive rose sharply from 27% to 39%.
Directive meaning what exactly? How did that differ from a normal prompt?
It means users are no longer just exploring the latent space of the model. They are no longer just chatting with the AI, brainstorming loose ideas, or asking it to tell them a joke to see what it can do.
Right, the novelty is worn off.
Exactly. They are giving it strict operational system-level commands, like analyze this specific CSV file, format this output according to this JSON schema, write this post using exactly these 3 brand guidelines, and exclude these 5 buzzwords.
Oh, wow.
Marketers have evolved. They don't want a conversational buddy anymore. They want an engine that can execute a specific directive flawlessly within a unified system.
So we know we have to avoid tool sprawl. We know we need to strategically select a skill category based on our specific business loop, and we know we need to be highly directive in how we command it.
Right.
But all of this theory kind of hits a brick wall when we move to actual implementation, because once we've selected the right skill to direct, we have to ask, where does it actually live? A tool is completely useless if it's plugged into the wrong outlet.
Absolutely.
And this brings us to a part of the deep dive that I think will resonate with a lot of frustrated listeners, which is the surprisingly fragile world of runtimes and API connections.
Oh, this is where we descend into the engine room of the whole operation.
Yeah.
And Frank points out that the single biggest implementation mistake marketers make is treating a complex Claude skill like it is a simple plug-and-play browser extension.
Right.
They install it, and they never stop to ask 2 vital underlying technical questions. Where exactly does this code run, and what specific event triggers it to actually take action?
Okay, I'm going to play the role of the incredibly frustrated business owner for a second here.
Go for it.
Let's say I do everything right. I find a great strategy skill. I install it. On Tuesday, I sit down at my laptop, I open the Claude desktop app, I type in my prompt, and it works perfectly. It generates a beautiful on-brand post. I am thrilled.
Sounds like a good Tuesday.
Right. But then on Wednesday, I asked my developer to hook that exact same skill up to our company's internal software so it can run automatically in the background. And it's completely broken. It just spits out 404 errors and failure codes. Why? If the AI is so smart, why can't it just do the exact same thing it did on Tuesday?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how software architecture functions, the failures you are describing are almost never the AI's fault. Claude's language model isn't broken. What you are experiencing are mismatched surfaces.
Mismatched surfaces. Okay, let me try to synthesize that.
Yeah.
Are you saying it's kind of like trying to plug an Apple Lightning charger into an Android phone? Like the electricity, the AI's intelligence is perfectly fine, but the physical environment it's trying to talk to is entirely rejecting the shape of the request?
That is a phenomenal synthesis. Yes, exactly. The environment is rejecting the request because the expectations of the runtime have changed entirely. Think of a surface as the specific digital environment where the software is expected to live and breathe. Frank actually outlines 3 primary runtimes, and they each have totally different rules of engagement.
Walk us through them. What are the 3?
First, you have the desktop runtime. This is the web browser or the app interface you used on Tuesday. It is highly visual, it is hands-on, and it fundamentally relies on a human being sitting there, reading the output, and typing a response in a chat box.
It expects human babysitting, basically.
Exactly. Second, you have the code runtime. This is when the skill is running much closer to a developer's workflow. So, perhaps executing locally in a terminal or integrated into an IDE, an integrated development environment. It actually requires technical configuration to even start up. And third, you have the API runtime. This is pure machine-to-machine communication. This is what you tried to use on Wednesday. It is hooked directly into your business's back-end systems with no graphical interface and absolutely no human in the loop.
So a skill might be perfectly optimized to converse with a human typing in a friendly chat box, but completely lack the rigid internal instructions required to handle a raw data feed coming from a silent API.
Exactly. When an API implementation fails, it's usually because it's missing crucial, invisible technical handshakes that the desktop version just handles automatically for you.
Like what? What kind of handshakes?
Well, for instance, the API environment might be missing environment variables. These are essentially secret keys or configuration files that the software absolutely needs to understand its surroundings and authenticate itself. Or, very commonly in social media automation, the silent failure is caused by an expired OAuth token.
An oath token. Okay, let's demystify that for the non-developers listening.
Think of an oath token as a highly specific digital hall pass. When you click Allow to grant a new piece of software permission to post to your company's LinkedIn page, LinkedIn doesn't give that software your actual username and password.
Right, that would be a massive security risk.
Huge risk. Instead, LinkedIn generates a temporary token, a hall pass, that says, this software is allowed to publish on this user's behalf.
But those passes don't last forever, do they?
No, they expire regularly for security reasons. So if your automated skill is running silently via API in the background, and that oath token expires on Wednesday morning, what happens? The AI might still do its job perfectly. It might generate the most brilliant, persuasive piece of marketing copy ever written. But when it takes that copy and tries to open the digital door to LinkedIn, the door is locked.
Oh, wow.
The system fails silently in the background, you get no output, and you just assume the AI model itself is broken.
Or, I suppose, it could just be an untriggered command, right?
Yes, exactly. The API is sitting there, fully functional, just waiting for a specific digital signal to start working. Perhaps a webhook from your CRM or a file upload into a specific cloud folder. But if that signal never actually arrives, the AI simply does nothing.
Wow. So the structural plumbing is just as important, if not more important, than the actual poetry the AI is writing.
Much more important, because if the plumbing leaks in an automated system, it doesn't just fail to produce, it can actively, rapidly damage your business's reputation.
Yeah.
And this brings us to a critical concept that Frank calls safety by design, which is aimed at preventing the absolute nightmare scenario.
Yeah,
Accidental publish.
the accidental publish. Just hearing that phrase makes my stomach drop as a marketer. We have all seen brands trend on social media for all the wrong reasons, because an intern posted something inappropriate or a scheduling tool misfired.
As it should. Frank is uncompromising on this point. You must treat any AI tool that has the physical architectural capability to actually post to your public social media feeds as a highly sensitive production system.
Right.
You do not treat it as a fun little science experiment to mess around with on a Friday afternoon.
Because a bad post, pushed automatically to 100,000 followers, can ruin a decade of brand equity in seconds.
Precisely. To protect yourself from this, Frank insists on implementing a security principle known as least privilege permissions.
Okay, I am familiar with this concept from enterprise IT security. It essentially means you only give a user or a system the exact minimum level of access it needs to complete its specific job and absolutely nothing more.
That is exactly right. If you have installed an AI auditor skill, and its only job is to read your past posts, to analyze your tone of voice and calculate engagement rates, you absolutely do not give that skill API permission to write and publish new posts.
Makes sense.
If it only needs access to your LinkedIn data, you do not grant it a master token that also gives it access to your Facebook page, your X account, and your customer service inbox. You keep the permissions as suffocatingly tight as possible.
You don't give the janitor the keys to the bank vault just because he needs to mop the lobby.
Exactly. Furthermore, Frank heavily recommends isolating your test environments. When you are trying out a new prompt workflow or testing a new API connection, do not hook it up to your company's main page with your real audience.
Where should you test it?
Hook it up to a dummy account, a private sandbox, let the AI hallucinate, let the loops break, let it make its massive mistakes where absolutely no one can see them.
That makes total logistical sense. But I want to dig into why this safety is so hypercritical right now, beyond just avoiding an embarrassing typo, because Frank references another piece of research here that is honestly a little bit terrifying when you think about the implications for automated marketing.
Yes, he points to a landmark study conducted by Anthropic involving their Claude 3 Opus model. The researchers wanted to empirically measure the persuasive power of these advanced language models.
Okay.
So they designed a study where they had Claude 3 Opus generate arguments on various topics using 4 distinct prompting styles. They kept the generated arguments relatively concise, capping them at about 250 words.
So roughly the length of a solid long-form LinkedIn post.
Exactly. They then took these AI-generated arguments and presented them to human participants alongside arguments written by actual humans on the exact same topics.
Okay.
The goal was to measure how much the text shifted the underlying stances and opinions of the readers.
And what was the result? How did the AI stack up against the human writers?
The study found that the arguments generated by Claude 3 Opus did not statistically differ in persuasiveness from the arguments written by actual humans.
We really need to let that sink in for a moment.
Uh-huh.
The AI is statistically just as persuasive, just as capable of shifting human opinion as a skilled human writer.
It is.
So if we look at that through the lens of brand safety and automated runtimes, if Claude is just as persuasive as a human, letting it auto-publish to your audience without strict guardrails is essentially like handing the keys to your company's public relations department to a brilliant, highly charismatic, but entirely unmanaged and unsupervised intern.
That is the perfect way to frame the risk. You have an unsupervised intern who has the capability to generate highly convincing, deeply persuasive arguments about your product, about your competitors, or even about sensitive social issues.
Then they have the button.
Right. They have the technical ability to blast those arguments out to the entire world instantly, 24 hours a day. It is a recipe for absolute disaster if you do not have human oversight and architectural safety built in.
Okay, so we've acknowledged the danger, we've put the guardrails on our highly persuasive intern, we've checked our API tokens, we've set least privilege permissions, we've set our dummy accounts.
Right.
How do we actually put this system to work to drive revenue? It is time to dive into the core promise of this deep dive, breaking down Frank's actual methodology for the 60-minute weekly sprint.
Yes, this is where we transition from defensive architecture into offensive strategy. Frank's core thesis for this sprint is uncompromisingly simple. AI output is only as good as the strategic input it receives. If you give Claude vague instructions, if you just feed it generic vibes, you are going to get generic, boring, invisible output.
I think we really need to explain the how WHY behind that, because a lot of people still treat AI like a magic 8-ball. If you just give it the vibes, like typing in, write a motivational post about teamwork, what is actually happening under the hood that makes the output so bad?
That is a crucial technical distinction to make. An LLM, a large language model, operates by predicting the next most statistically probable word in a sequence based on the massive vector space of its training data.
Okay.
If your prompt is just write a post about teamwork, that vector space is incredibly vast and generic. The AI is drawing from thousands of corporate training manuals, stock motivational posters, and cliché business books. It predicts the most statistically average string of words possible.
You just get corporate word salad, synergy, collaboration, moving the needle.
Exactly. It's technically coherent, but semantically empty. However, Frank argues that before you even open the Claude interface to generate a post, you must define 5 incredibly specific inputs.
And these inputs change that.
Yes. They serve as semantic anchors. They violently narrow down that vector space, forcing the AI to draw from highly specific, highly relevant clusters of data.
Okay, let's break down these 5 semantic anchors. How are we spending the first 10 minutes of our 60-minute sprint?
The first input is 3 to 5 real audience pains. And real is the operative word here. Not guesses, not buyer personas you made up in a boardroom, but actual verbatim complaints or problems you have heard on sales calls, read in your customer support tickets, or seen in your direct messages.
So instead of the generic vibe of teamwork, the real pain point is, my team uses Slack all day, but somehow everyone still completely misses their project deadlines.
Yes. Now, the underlying language model has a specific, relatable friction point to build its narrative around. The output instantly shifts from generic to hyper-targeted.
That makes total sense. What's the second input?
The second input you must define is your positioning, distilled into a single, razor-sharp sentence. Who exactly are you, and why are you structurally different from your competitors? Third is your current offer, and the specific next action you want the reader to take. Are you pushing them to a webinar, a free trial, a physical coupon? The AI needs to know the destination.
Right.
Fourth, you need proof assets. Testimonials, before and after photos, mini case studies, raw data points. You have to feed Claude the concrete evidence.
So instead of telling Claude to just say, we are the best software on the market, you literally paste in a quote from a customer saying, this software saved my logistics team $10,000 last quarter. You show, don't tell, and you let the AI format the showing.
Precisely. And the fifth and final input, which honestly might be the most important, is content angles tied to real distribution.
Now, this part of the guide really blew my mind, this distribution cheat code, because the default assumption for 99% of people is that social media is just about making content, posting it on your own feed, and praying that the algorithmic gods bless you with virality.
Right, which rarely works.
But Frank says that is a losing game. You have to shift your mindset entirely. You must become a distributor, not just a maker.
What's fascinating here is his framework, which he calls the list of 70. He argues that you shouldn't just be broadcasting your message into the void of your own timeline. You should be strategically designing content specifically for other people to share with their audiences.
Interesting.
He breaks this distribution map down into 4 distinct categories.
Let's make this highly concrete for the listener. Say I am running that local coffee shop in Cincinnati we discussed earlier. Who exactly is on this list of 70?
Let's build the map. First, you need to identify 20 local or industry accounts. For a coffee shop, that's not other coffee shops. That's the independent bookstore down the street, the local boutique gym, the neighborhood business association, or the student union at the nearby university.
Got it. Accounts that have a geographic footprint. Second category.
20 creators. These are micro-influencers who operate in your specific niche or city. Local food bloggers, lifestyle creators who review study spots, hyper-local podcasters.
Then the third category, 20 non-competing businesses.
This is where the strategy gets really sharp. You have to ask yourself, who shares my exact target audience but does not sell what I sell?
Oh, that's clever.
For the coffee shop, maybe it's a popular co-working space downtown. They don't sell lattes, they sell desk space, but their members drink a massive amount of coffee.
And finally, the fourth category, 10 communities.
Local subreddits, Facebook groups dedicated to your specific town, hyper-local email newsletters. Once you have built this list of 70, and yes, it takes time to research, but you only do it once. You don't just use it to spam them with your ads.
Right.
You ask yourself 2 critical questions for each entity on the list. What do they actually value, and what can I use Claude to create that will make them look good to their audience?
So you design the asset specifically for them to steal and share.
Yeah.
You aren't just making a graphic that says, come buy coffee at Joe's. You are using Claude to generate, say, a highly formatted, bite-sized infographic titled The 5 Quietest Spots to Read a Book in the Northside Neighborhood. And you specifically feature that independent bookstore from your list at number 1.
Exactly. You give them a clear, valuable takeaway, a mini checklist, a simple data point, a beautifully formatted list. When they see you feature them, they naturally share it to their own feed.
Oh, wow.
When you design for distribution first, a small business can use one single piece of content to generate thousands of impressions across entirely different networks, completely bypassing the unpredictable whims of the main feed algorithm.
So we have spent the first 15 to 20 minutes of our sprint establishing our strategy, our 5 inputs, and mapping our distribution targets. Now we actually have to produce the content. How do we do this efficiently in the remaining time without getting overwhelmed?
Frank explains how to use Claude to rapidly dial in 4 specific variables from one single core idea. The mistake people make is asking Claude to write 10 completely different ideas from scratch.
Right, which takes forever.
Instead, you ask it to take one proven concept and systematically manipulate its variables.
It's kind of like an optometrist testing lenses during an eye exam. Instead of asking Claude to build a pair of glasses from scratch and hoping they work, you are giving it the core prescription, the core idea, and saying, better one, or better two, contrarian hook, or curiosity hook. You are forcing it to iterate on a baseline.
That is exactly the mechanism. Let's look at the 4 variables you are testing. The first variable is the hook. You instruct Claude to take your core offer and write one version leading with a curiosity hook, one version with a contrarian hook that challenges an industry norm, and one version leading heavily with a hard proof point.
Okay.
The second variable is length. You need a short, punchy 280-character version for X, a medium-length structured version for LinkedIn, and a long-form narrative version for an email newsletter.
What's the third variable?
Call to action, or CTA. You test different desired outcomes. One post variation might explicitly ask a question to drive comments and algorithmic engagement. Another variation might ask for profile visits to build followers. And another might push aggressively for direct clicks to an external link.
And the fourth?
And the fourth variable is visual direction. You aren't asking Claude to generate the image itself, but you are asking it to conceptualize the visual layout that accompanies the text, like suggest a layout with one bold headline, 2 supporting bullet points, and 1 photographic proof element.
Okay, but this raises a massive red flag for me. If we are using Claude to rapidly generate all these variations, 3 different hooks, multiplied by 3 different lengths, multiplied by different CTAs, we are suddenly producing a massive volume of text.
Yes, you are.
How do we prevent this high-speed mass production from devolving into robotic spam? Because we've all read those AI posts that are technically grammatically correct, but they just sound hollow and soulless.
This is where Frank introduces his quality control secret, and honestly, it is the most vital 15 minutes of the sprint. The absolute antidote to robotic spam is ruthlessly testing every single output for specificity.
Specificity. Walk me through how that QA process works in practice.
It is a rapid-fire manual check. You look at the generated post variation, and you ask yourself one strict question. Can this exact sentence be traced directly back to a real customer pain point, a specific offer, or a tangible proof asset that I provided in my inputs?
Okay, so if the post includes a sentence that says, in today's fast-paced digital landscape, operational efficiency is the key to unlocking synergistic growth.
You delete it immediately.
You delete it, or you force Claude to rewrite it. Because that sentence is a hallucinated platitude. It is not specific to your business, it is not specific to your customer's pain, and it could apply to literally any company on Earth.
If it cannot be anchored to the reality of your specific business, it gets cut. That is how you maintain the speed of AI production without sacrificing the authentic voice of your brand.
Wow, okay.
Exactly. And what is truly wild here is that what Frank is instructing marketers to do, manually rapidly testing these different hooks and angles side by side to see what resonates best with human psychology, is actually mirroring some incredibly advanced machine learning research going on right now.
Yes. Frank brings up a fascinating technical parallel on the guide. He references an R6 paper focused on predicting relative reaction to social media posts. The researchers in this study didn't try to just program an AI to guess what makes a good post in a vacuum, because good is entirely subjective.
Right.
Instead, they framed the evaluation as a pairwise question between post A and post B, which one mathematically generates more reaction.
Going back to your optometrist analogy, it is literally the machine learning equivalent of better one or better two.
Exactly. To accomplish this, the researchers used a fine-tuned Flying Roberta cross-encoder.
Okay, we are definitely going to need to translate Flying Roberta cross-encoder for the audience. Let's break down the mechanics of what that actually means.
I'll try to synthesize it. Think of a standard encoder as a translator that takes messy human text and turns it into a mathematical map of vector space.
Right.
A computer can actually understand and process. A normal single encoder looks at one sentence at a time in isolation. A cross-encoder, however, takes 2 entirely different pieces of text, processes them simultaneously through the neural network, and directly compares how they relate to each other in that vector space.
Okay.
In this specific study, they fed the cross-encoder original tweet content alongside Claude-generated variations to see which specific combination of words predicted a higher probability of user reaction.
So what does this all mean for the small business owner listening right now, if we connect this to the bigger picture?
It means that as a marketer, when you are sitting at your desk during your 60-minute sprint, looking at 3 different hooks generated by Claude, and you are trying to decide which one will get more likes or drive more clicks, you are essentially performing the exact same analytical function as that highly advanced cross-encoder.
You are doing manual pairwise evaluation.
You are the algorithm.
That is an incredibly empowering way to view your role in the process. You are the sophisticated cross-encoder.
Yeah.
We've done the strategy, we've mapped our distribution, we've generated a month's worth of highly specific content variations, and we've done our pairwise evaluation to select the winners. As we discussed earlier when we were talking about runtimes and safety, moving from the drafting table to live, public feed is where the greatest risks and the greatest rewards lie. Let's talk about the final stage: production, posting, and proving actual return on investment.
Let's do it.
This is the final crucial step in Frank's system, and he reiterates a fundamental operational rule that every marketer using AI must internalize. Writing is safe, posting is incredibly dangerous.
Because the platforms themselves, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, they are watching how this data arrives.
Closely, and they are ruthless in their enforcement. We have to remember that automated platform policies are not enforced by empathetic human moderators who might understand context or nuance.
No.
They are enforced by algorithmic bots. If a platform's security bot detects unusual API activity, like a sudden burst of posts, rate limit violations, or repetitive posting behaviors that look like spam, they will ban or shadow ban your account instantly.
And what's scary is that they will ban you even if your actual content isn't offensive. Just the mechanical behavior of the posting can trigger the ban.
Exactly. Going back to our earlier discussion about runtimes, an expired OAuth token renewal might cause an API loop in your custom code, and suddenly your automated skill tries to post the exact same image 50 times in 10 seconds.
Oh, man.
The platform's bot sees that, flags it as malicious automation, and boom, your account is suspended, you lose weeks of engagement, and potentially thousands of dollars in pipeline.
So how do we survive that environment? What is the golden rule for implementation?
The golden rule is the absolute necessity of decoupling content creation from content publishing. You cannot have a straight, unmanaged pipe from the AI's generation engine directly to your public feed.
Okay.
There must always be a human-in-the-loop approval step.
So to clarify the daily workflow here, Frank suggests literally splitting the work into 2 distinct mental and operational modes.
Yes, he calls them research mode and posting mode. In research mode, you are in the sandbox. You let Claude off the leash. You let it roam, brainstorm, and analyze large data sets. You might feed it authorized data like an export of your YouTube comments or DMs you have explicit permission to study.
Right.
You look for trends, you test wild ideas, you generate those dozens of variations.
So it's the messy creative phase where mistakes don't matter.
Right. But posting mode is an entirely different environment. Posting mode is strictly parameterized. It is heavily gated execution. In posting mode, absolutely nothing leaves the system and hits a public API without a human physically clicking an approve button to verify compliance, factual accuracy, and brand tone.
So what does this all mean? Once it is approved and it is successfully posted, we need to prove that all this 60-minute sprint work is actually doing something for the business bottom line. We need to prove ROI.
Yes, absolutely.
How do we track that without getting completely overwhelmed by a dashboard with 100 different vanity metrics?
Frank simplifies this analytics phase beautifully. To prove ROI, he argues you should only track 4 specific metrics. And the reason you only track these 4 is that they map directly one-to-one with your actual business funnel.
Let's hear them. What are the 4 metrics that matter?
Metric 1, reach. This represents your distribution. How many unique eyeballs actually saw the post? Metric 2, saves and shares. This represents resonance.
And I assume Frank values those much higher than a simple like.
Exponentially higher. I mean, a like is cheap. It takes half a second.
Yeah.
But a save or a share means the content was so inherently valuable or thought-provoking that the person wanted to permanently keep it in their library or actively endorse it by giving it to a friend.
Which ties perfectly back to that list of 70 distribution strategy we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
The whole goal of creating that targeted content for local partners or creators is to get those accounts hitting the share button to their massive audiences.
Exactly. You are engineering for resonance. Metric 3, profile visits. This represents intent. The post wasn't just interesting in passing, it was compelling enough that the user actively clicked away from their feed to find out who wrote it and what your company does.
And the last one.
Metric 4, clicks and leads. This represents actual revenue traction. Did they leave the social platform entirely, click the link in your bio, and enter your actual sales funnel or CRM?
Reach, saves and shares, profile visits, clicks and leads. That is incredibly clean. But when I think about executing all of this, managing the complex API runtimes, generating the variations, maintaining the strict human-in-the-loop approval gating, checking the 4 analytics metrics, and multi-platform scheduling, it still sounds like it could take a lot more than 60 minutes if you don't have the right software architecture.
Oh, for sure.
How does Frank actually manage this logistically without building custom code from scratch?
This is where the synergy with his company, Whoop Social, comes into play. Frank's approach is to strictly divide the labor based on what each technology does best. He uses Claude's LLM to handle the creative heavy lifting, analyzing the messy data, brainstorming the specific angles, generating the cross-encoder variations, and adapting the copy for different channels.
Right.
But he does not trust Claude to handle the dangerous API publishing.
He switches to traditional deterministic software for the dangerous part.
Yes. He uses a dedicated, purpose-built tool like Whoop Social to act as the branding and execution arm. Claude provides the raw, brilliant text, and then Whoop Social takes over to unify the brand voice, lock in the visual aesthetics, and safely, reliably schedule the content across 7 different channels, all while maintaining that crucial, non-negotiable human approval step in the interface.
It's the perfect marriage. You get the AI's massive processing power for the poetry and the traditional software's absolute reliability for the plumbing.
Beautifully put.
And speaking of that massive processing power, there is one last study Frank mentions in the source material that I want to weave in here because it really highlights the immense analytical capability that marketers can tap into during that messy research mode we just talked about.
Yes, this is a fascinating glimpse into the immediate future of social listening and market research. He mentions an ArcSiv study focused on a concept called zero-shot crisis tweet classification.
Okay, zero shot is a major buzzword in AI right now. Let's clearly define what that means before we talk about this study.
Zero-shot learning in AI means the model is able to correctly categorize or process data that it has never explicitly been trained on. Traditionally, if you wanted an AI to recognize a picture of a cat, you had to train it on 10,000 pictures of cats.
Right.
With zero-shot capabilities, the model is so massive and its general understanding of language is so deep that it can infer the correct category of new data simply based on the instructions you give it, without needing any prior customized fine-tuning.
So it's smart enough to just figure things out on the fly.
Exactly. In this specific study, researchers took an enormous volume of messy, chaotic tweets posted during a massive humanitarian crisis. They fed this raw data into the AI, and using zero-shot classification, the AI was able to accurately sort that massive volume of unstructured data into 16 highly distinct humanitarian classes.
16 distinct classes. Things like infrastructure damage, need for medical supplies, water shortages, without being specifically trained on those exact tweets beforehand.
Yes. It sorted the data, scored each tweet for informativeness, and reported highly accurate results purely based on its fundamental understanding of human language and context.
If we connect this back to the bigger picture for the small business owner listening right now, this is a massive paradigm shift. Because what this means is that during your 15 minutes of research mode, you aren't just looking at your last 10 comments and taking wild guesses about what your market wants.
No, you don't have to anymore.
You can export thousands of rows of authorized customer service data or hundreds of direct messages, feed them into Claude, and relying on that same zero-shot capability, it has the analytical horsepower to sort your customers' messy, unstructured, chaotic conversations into highly specific categories of pain points and desires almost instantly.
Exactly. It turns raw, overwhelming noise into highly structured strategic intelligence. It gives a local plumber or a solo creator the kind of deep market research capability that used to require a dedicated team of data scientists and a 6-figure budget.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today, moving from high-level strategy all the way down to API tokens and zero-shot machine learning. Let's summarize the journey we've taken to ensure we hit our mission.
Sounds good.
We started by looking at the Claude skill, not as a magic button you press to avoid doing work, but as a structured, closed loop. A loop that requires specific real-world inputs, semantic anchors from your business to avoid sounding like corporate word salad.
And we learned the critical importance of targeted distribution, the list of 70. designing content specifically for other entities to share, rather than just shouting into the void of your own timeline and praying to the algorithm.
We established the absolute necessity of defensive architecture, understanding mismatched runtimes, respecting the danger of APIs, and enforcing human-gated publishing to protect your hard-earned brand equity from automated bans and AI hallucinations.
And we simplified the massive world of analytics down to just 4 core business-driving metrics: reach, saves and shares, profile visits, and clicks and leads.
If you are listening to this deep dive right now, this 60-minute weekly sprint system is the ultimate shortcut. It is exactly how you avoid information overload, how you bypass the trap of tool sprawl, and how you actually execute a world-class, consistent social media strategy. It's about working smarter, leveraging zero-shot intelligence, and maintaining absolute control over your messaging.
But, as you go out and build these automated growth loops, there is a deeper implication here that wasn't explicitly mentioned in the core text, but is entirely unavoidable given the Anthropic data we discussed.
What is that final thought?
We talked extensively about how an AI like Claude 3 Opus is already statistically indistinguishable from a human in its fundamental persuasiveness. It can shift human opinion just as effectively as we can.
Right.
And we are now actively building automated closed-loop systems to identify our audience's deepest, most vulnerable pain points using zero-shot classification, and then distributing highly tailored, mathematically optimized, highly persuasive messages directly to them at massive scale.
Yeah.
This raises an incredibly important question about the future of our profession. At what point does the human in the loop stop being merely a marketing editor checking for typos and start becoming purely an ethical gatekeeper? As you build your growth loops this week, as you sit there at your desk clicking the approve button on these rapidly generated hyper-persuasive posts, you have to ask yourself, are you just editing for brand tone, or are you now required to edit for conscience?
That is a profoundly powerful thought to leave on. Because at the end of the day, we started this deep dive talking about how the dashboard of AI marketing is murky and full of operational muddy waters. The tools we have discussed today are incredibly, almost unimaginably powerful, but they still require a human hand to guide them, to build the safe plumbing, to provide the real-world semantic anchors, and ultimately to take absolute responsibility for what goes out into the world under your name. Thank you for joining us today. Take this 60-minute sprint, apply it rigorously to your own projects, and we will see you on the next deep dive.